Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
There we go.
Yes, I have to be the one to share my screen and all that good stuff. How's everybody feeling this morning?
Good, good.
All right.
All is well.
Sorry, could you remind me of the order? I can't pull up the PDF right now.
Okay, so Tia will go first from Jackson State, then Maria, then Dr. Williams, and then Drs. Diggs, Barath, Roberts Lewis, and Bailey.
All right, thank you.
I was going to try to give at least my crew some time to get in here. I don't see them yet, but we have enough. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I just want to say welcome to track 6, preparing the next generation for a rapidly changing world. I am Dr. Diggs, the moderator for today or this morning. I hope everybody has enjoyed COMPA thus far and just ready to take over this presentation session. I'm excited about the conversation that we have and to learn about you all's research. Of course, this is a 90-minute session. Because we have 4 presenters, we have some wiggle room here. So it's 12 to 15 minutes for you to present. So if you were trying to make it very timely, it's okay. We can go a little bit over. But I do want to leave some time for question and answers at the end. So we'll try to give 20, 30 minutes for that because I do want you all to, have time to really talk about your discussion. And then shortly following after this, we have the final plenary session. So we have to be on time for that. So what I will do is introduce each speaker for today on our panel. I will pull up your presentation, so work with me because sometimes Zoom does not work as properly. I try to line it up as much as I could. And then you could just share your work. So first we will start with Tia Grisham, and I apologize if I say your name wrong. Please feel free to take yourself off of mute and correct me because I hate when people say my name wrong. She's a master's student coming from Jackson State University. And her work today will focus on examination of the current post-secondary education transition of American Indians and Mississippi Choctaws. Is that correct?
It's Choctaw.
Choctaws.
Yeah.
See, take yourself. So welcome. We look forward to that. Then we have Maria Lungu from Florida Atlantic University. Are you a master's student, doctoral student?
PhD candidate.
No, that's right. I went to FAU. So
Oh,
yeah,
you did?
I did.
Oh,
All
go
right, so we
Owls.
have the PhD candidate. It's proud when you say that, when you get to that point. And she will be talking about algorithmic decision-making and novel governance arrangements, a conceptual undertaking. I'm assuming this might be part of your dissertation.
Yes, it is. Small part.
Right. So we're going to help her out with making sure that she becomes Dr. Lungu.
Thank you.
Then we will hear from Dr. Eric Williams from South Carolina State University, who will be talking about performance indicators, intended and unintended consequences for HBCUs. So welcome, Dr. Williams. And then our last presentation is a combination of professors and the work that we've done. So that includes myself, Dr. Barath at Savannah State University, Dr. Christy Roberts Lewis with the United Negro College Fund, and Dr. Deborah Bailey from Bowie State University, and our work on looking at mentoring at the intersection of crisis management and retention of public administration faculty and students at HBCUs. Okay. So we will get started and I will pull up the presentations. Let me share my screen. Different thing. Can everybody see the screen? This presentation. Can everybody see that? We are good to go. I will start the timer. So as soon as you would like to get started, Tia, feel free.
Absolutely. And can you remind me again, what is the minimum of 15 minutes or that's the max?
That's the maximum. So you have between 12 and 15 minutes.
Okay. All right.
Look, if you go a little bit over, it's okay.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Halito. Well, first, let me start it with my native language. Halito, Sahochafora Tia Grisham, Heja, Mississippi, Chata, Yume Amitile Ragon, Nyapawash Manopolis Nana Happy, Nana Limiche Hangat, Leta Chapila Hana. So, what I said was, my name is Tia Grisham. I am a Mississippi Choctaw, and what I want to speak to you is about furthering about the post-secondary education of my people. And so, of course, you see the PowerPoint. It is the just really talking about the post-secondary education transition of American Indians and the tribal scholarships. And it's mostly going to be about my tribe, Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. And so, of course, again, I'm a master's student at Jackson State University, and I am in the Department of Public Policy and Administration. And so the next slide, I know that I updated it, so let me see what's the next one. All right. So again, the background of Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and the tribal scholarships. As you can see, we are a self-governed tribe of 11,034 members, and I am so proud to say that. I mean, we were fairly recognized back in 1945, and back then, I mean, even before the Trail of Tears, we had over 20 plus strong. Of course, the history about that, but anyways, so this, as of today, we are 11,034 members strong. So in generally, this level of American Indians, individuals of Mississippi's run parallel to the state and national surveys, averages. So according to the data obtained from the 2021 US Census and the 2011 American Community Survey, Mississippi Band Tribal's high school graduation rate is 51%, with 38.3% completing their GED and a special education certificates. So for MBCI, graduating high school students in tribal Mississippi Band's tribal scholarship program offers full academic scholarships and assistance to attend the colleges and university of the choice. So, but according to the U.S. Census Bureau, the 75.6% of Mississippi's ages 18 to 24-year-olds population was identified only 91 identified as American Indian or American Native, and 14.4 has received bachelor's degree or higher compared to other races. So compared to other races, American Indians and Alaskan Natives is the lowest percentage of graduating rate in Mississippi. And another thing that I had on my notes saying that, but even in, according to my notes, of course, Native Americans, if you did not know, we are there are, oh my God, I missed my, the American Indian population is divided into more than more than 567 tribal federally recognized tribes. And so there is difference between the federally, the state, and just the local. And there are still tribes out there, 800 tribes out there that are not even recognized in any level. So they're still fighting their sovereignty. So got that. And as of the 2016 and 2026, an American Indian population who reside in off tribal trust land is an average about 27%. And then, and so according to that, 7.3 or 46 of college students were enrolled in a 4-year public institution in spring. I believe that is in the next slide. In the spring 2021, and as of spring of 22, enrollment of Native American increased by 0.1%. So the previous researchers, so back in 2022, the students were, and well, they were, and I still say still, the 1% of the population of the total college and university enrollment in the United States, which remains in the same until this day. So there was an increase in 1976 only to 0.7%, and then for American Indian and American Alaskan Natives ages 25 and above in 2003, 2.28% had dropped out of high school, and a high school diploma with the highest attainment was 35.2%, and 42% had pursued a college degree. So even when comparing with the total population, approximately 20% less American Indians and Alaska Native students went to college. So going to this slide, the problems of Native American students in post-secondary, again, is 24% of them of 1824 Native American students are enrolled in college compared to 41% of the US populations. The previous percentage that I gave you was the total world population. And so this one for United States population is 24%. So 41% of first-time and full-time Native American students attend 4-year institutions beginning in 2013. Graduate was then 6 years compared to 63 of all students. In 2019, 25% of Native Americans over the age of 25 had an associate's degree or higher, compared to the 42% of all those that were over. Oh, give me a second. I do apologize. My child just walked in. Okay, so 2019, 25% of Native Americans over the age of 25 had an associate's degree or higher, compared to the 42% of all those over the age of 25. The next slide. So I just wanted to show you, I don't think you can see it, but it's just wanted to show you like a graph. American Indians were the lowest number of graduation rate in 2016 and a number of 39.6%. And then the next slide will show, and this is from 2016, and the next one is in graduation rate in 2020. So even by 2021, Americans had increased by 44.1%, but American Indian students are currently on only 15%, less 15% less than half of the national average. So in fall of 2020, only 0.7% of Native Americans enrolled in college. The next slide. So made me think, okay, so why are we not? We have great resources, and especially here in Mississippi Band, we have great resources. We have a program that fully assists us in financial aid. We don't have to worry about tuition. We don't have to worry about other fees, living expenses. What's going on? So why are our students not attending colleges like, they should? I'm pretty sure. I had friends that say, man, I would have loved to have that opportunity and, and not worry about it. And, never thought about that. So here's one of the things that I saw, the challenges in art with the tribe in Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and within our students. So according to the data provided by the tribal scholarships, the number of, this is the wrong, okay. So the number of students who received their college degree were quite low with a total of 206, even though the number of scholarship represent was 2,917 students in between the 2016 to 2020. So just a little 26 in 2016 there was 618 participants. Out of that, you had 265% in the fall sessions, 286 in the spring, and 69 students in the summer sessions. And out of that, there are 156 out of those that attended out of state, and there was 462 in-state students. And so you'll see even in the 2017 and even 2018 that you see a lot more students coming into the spring session, and then less in the summertime. But you will also, it also reflects that they will rather be close to home. So in the next slide, I'm just going, I think my 15 minutes is almost up already. So one of the things that, one of the challenges that we did see, not just Mississippi Band, but also in Native American students in colleges, was the social isolation. So one of them was social isolation. So the students tend to be more socially isolated due to cultural identity issues resulting in marginalization. So these problems happen in their relationships with the faculty members and peer classmates, once marginalized, educational disengagement, and refusal to seek help from college supports services, often reflecting withdrawal from school. So we do have a lot of students, well, I'll go on to the next one. So number 2. The other challenge is academically challenged. Back in 2007, Dr. Carlisle had studied of the Mississippi Band student attending universities and colleges in Mississippi. Some of the students were not sufficiently prepared for a college education when they were in a high school curriculum. So without adequate academic skills, also with English being their second language, the Native American students tend to feel adulting challenges in completing the academic assignments and the dates. And the third challenge was they tend to the third challenge is that they're taking care of their legal dependent. The 2/3 of female students have family members that they do plan to take care of. And 25% of the male students have legal family dependents during their transition to college. Unlike other college students, the Native American students are under more stress, which are related to their families. Their family-related barriers have provided difficult challenges and barriers in building needed social networks with their faculty members and peer classmates. And with these challenges, I wanted to just share a story from a student that we are currently working on with. He is a Native American, he's a Mississippi Choctaw. He started his post-secondary at a university institution. And again, out of those 3 challenges, he hit those marks. And so as one of the biggest issues that he had was he didn't think he was prepared to be in a university. He didn't feel like he was supported by faculty members, meaning like he would ask questions to the teachers and he wouldn't get a response back. And so, or even with like, or just having peer support when he didn't feel like he can talk to anybody that he can be culturally like related to. And so that kind of just helped him like, okay, I am not feeling welcome here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And so and as we were talking to him, he also mentioned that, hey, I think I'm just going to go home because my family needs me. I have to help take care of my siblings. My mother passed away, so I had to, and this is a male Native student. And so he did. He transferred to a community college, but still, like he came home to take care of his family, but also as he was in a community college, he was having difficulty because of the support he wasn't getting even at the school. As much as he wanted to take and do well in his academics, it was just challenging for him. He was just not connecting. And so again, that's just today. And back then when I had attended university, I felt the same way. So I was a Native American student, and I am a Native American student. And so I went to a university that didn't have anybody that are, are me. I can honestly say that I was born and raised on an Indian reservation, and I am fluent in my language. And when I had attended this university, there was only like one or two, and those the students didn't speak much of the language. And so I had lost some of my connections in the mean of trying to advance academically. And so I was away from my family, and it was so many different things that were challenging. And so I do understand these challenges that Native American students experiences. And so in the next slide, one of the things that even talking to the tribal scholarship program, to the next one. Okay, so with that being said, the finding is that at a college level, mentors and school faculty and staff, that the students can go for help when needed, not just advisors and someone more than our program staff. Most of the actual colleges do not have someone they can go to really for any reason, at least that they feel comfortable going to. So our students are usually very involved in their communities and are very family and community oriented. So we have a lot of first generation college students that, that tribal scholarship funds, the tribe funds, and I was one of those. And most, when we're going to college, as with the most college students, go and often are very alone. This is very hard on our students and has led to much of the dropout rate. So many have left to help their family financially and because they prefer to be with their family. So supportive services is a huge need across the board. I know schools offer these to their students, but our students but a tribal member, faculty member could be and make a huge impact. And the next slide. So policy suggesting further studies by addressing these needs, it is necessary to seek and create an integrated pathway for NBCI or other Native American youth as they transfer from secondary to post-secondary education. So further, the projects will seek to ensure that once they arrive on campus, they will feel that university and college life can extend part of their community and a space where they can thrive. So currently other universities which has partnerships engage youth living on the tribe by providing hands-on educational lessons that are culturally relevant, exposing youth to possible college majors and careers. And partnership will work with youth to help the identifying a community of resources at the university and colleges, and that they can call upon as needed. And then the partnership will work to develop an online course for instructors to take that will help them understand the unique needs of a tribal student and when they can do to ensure the success of youth that becomes students in their classes. And so so do y'all have any questions? And that's just, again, just what my research is going on in my presentation.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to save questions. So if you have a burning question that you would like to ask, please write that down so that we can do that at the end of this session.
Okay.
I was
So
wondering why
Dr. Diggs,
my,
sorry, it's giving me a chance to share the screen. Do you want me to share mine or will you share on your end?
if you can, go for it.
Okay, I think it'll work from
And
here.
what I'm going to try to do is when you have 3 minutes left, I'll put up the pink. And then when you get to the final minute, I had to be innovative. I had to think what was around me. So we'll put up the red.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just to make sure everyone can see the first screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So my name is Maria Lungu, and I'm a PhD candidate at Florida Atlantic University. And today my presentation is Algorithmic Decision-Making and Novel Governance Arrangements, a Conceptual Undertaking. So this is a small part of my dissertation proposal. So I'm going to be dealing directly with the First Step Act, but specifically with the pattern algorithms that are assigned to determining who benefits or doesn't benefit from the First Step Act. So this is just a small part dealing with the concept of algorithms. So firstly, algorithms are a set of finite rules or instructions that need to be followed with calculations or other problem-solving operations. Or alternatively, they've been described as a procedure for solving a mathematical problem. And algorithms are really the foundation of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so they're used to develop intelligent systems that can perform tasks such as image recognition, natural language processing, and of course, more specifically in this case, decision making. And so in public administration, the development of public administration under new public management has seen this integration of technological advances, and algorithms have been a big part of that in the last 5 to 10 years, especially in decision-making processes. And so the growth of this is considered sort of an emerging area in the field of PA. And so this has the potential to shape governance and impact the administration of PA goods and services. And so the use of algorithms and this predictive analytic systems is used across the field. So it ranges from judicial adjudication, what they use it when they decide how to assign educational provisional plans, how to assign financing in education. It's used in pretrial decision making, like I said, with the First Step Act, post-trial with the First Step Act. And so these are challenges associated with shifting and understanding how the implementation of these algorithms impact accountability, legitimacy, transparency, and various outcomes in PA. So in my research for this paper, I want to ask, to what extent does the growing ubiquity of algorithms impact the quest for legitimacy in the public admin domain? And what are the proposed macro, meso, and micro recommendations to ascribe accountability, transparency, and legitimacy? So this is just a theoretical undertaking with a provision of recommendations at the end. And like I said, just part of the dissertation process. Let me move this. And so when we consider algorithms, the literature is kind of split at this point. So there's the literature that talks about it being a part of transformative nature. And so there's different uses between different societal actors that are augmentative, and this is seen as a positive thing. And so some scholars also discuss the efficiency gains that public organizations derive from these new algorithmic internal processes that are implemented. And that's one of the big things, because the idea in PA is trying to improve efficiency and efficiency in service provision. So on another hand, scholars have also theorized that there's this disruptive nature of algorithms in policymaking. And the biggest issue is that there are biases that are baked into these algorithms. Second, that there's the accountability systems, because once an algorithm is implemented in different agencies, sometimes there's that pushback when the agencies are adopting the algorithm and they don't want to keep reporting how it's working and et cetera, because that sometimes there's issues with transparency. And of course, the evidence shows that the issues of racial discrimination are quite dire, especially in the criminal justice system. So PA can sort of assume that that despite some people seeing this as a transformative instruction and all these efficiency gains are being experienced, there's still this issue that public admin is trying to be conceptualized in the same vein that private sector is. So when algorithms are operationalized in the private sector or with big tech, there's certain discussion that happens based on how transformative it is and how it gains in efficiency. But when we contextualize this in the public sector, that's when there becomes an issue, because there are different requirements and concepts that are inherent in the public sector that don't apply in the private. And so when we look at how algorithms are seen in new public management, one of the biggest issues is the concepts of regulation. And so when I look at this in the paper in terms of a comparison. So there's a Chinese comparison and there's a European comparison. And I more specifically focus on the European one because it's the most instructive at this point. It's the most developed out of all the ones that are used currently and all the ones that have gained speed. And so in the EU context, they use the European Union General Data Protection Regulations, which guarantees the right to object to any issues relating to automated processes of data, including profiling, et cetera. And EU policymakers address these regulations and accountability through two comprehensive legislative proposals. The first is the Digital Services Act, which defines what obligations that platforms have to follow when they see that there's illegal or harmful content on their services. And that also, of course, allows for transparency and accountability. And the EU also uses the Artificial Intelligence Act, which uses a risk-based framework that assesses the high or low risk associated with algorithms that are adopted all across the EU. And so in contrast, the US does not have an overarching framework that we can look at in the same way that the GDPR is used in the EU. So in the US, when we consider regulations and legal applications, really we're looking at the Federal Consumer Online Privacy Rights Act, or we're looking at the Online Privacy Act, or we're conceptualizing the issues related to race under the Civil Rights Act of '64. So that's one of the biggest issues that the US is facing right now. And so another way to conceptualize this is through an accountability framework. And so legitimacy in public administration will require accountability because it provides ownership of responsibility to answer to the issues that citizens have and the trust issues that they have in this concept when they're dealing with these algorithms. And so accountability has this three-phase trajectory for external authority, which includes information, explanation and justification of decision-making and instrumentalities, and then consequences if equality and justice are not achieved. And so this is the framework that I will be looking at different concepts and data using. So from a PAR article, Public Administration Review article from 2021. And then also conceptualizing this under legitimacy. So legitimacy is this perception that actions are desirable, proper, appropriate, and those are used within socially constructed norms and values. And when legitimacy is not achieved, when these algorithms threaten the legitimacy of public administration, then you're going to have issues of attracting talent to public administration. You're going to undermine public administrator morale because they're the ones who are because people in agencies are probably going to be the ones implementing these algorithms. If there's no trust in the algorithms, you know why you went into public administration. Usually it's a service-based industry. So when you see that these algorithms are not working or they're biased, et cetera, it decreases your own morale. The inflexibility of the sector, and of course, a lack of respect of the law is one of the issues when legitimacy is not adhered to. And so in terms of the recommendations, this is just bare bones of where the recommendations are right now. So at the macro level, we're going to be focusing on these newly coordinated mechanisms. And so this will be the coordination between federal and state when it comes to how these algorithms are going to be adopted. And this, of course, will need to lead to new capacities. So it's not exactly saying that algorithms are bad at this point and that lawmakers should try to eradicate them, but it's how can we create these systems where we can strategize and adapt in a coordinated manner, similar to how the EU has fostered theirs in the GDPR. At the meso level, being able to balance assurance, accountability, and being able to monitor how these systems perform. So with the First Step Act, they use pattern. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard of pattern, but pattern tells you whether someone's low or high risk, whether they're likely to benefit from these recidivism processes. And so when you are able to assign monitoring systems in the way that the federal government has done so with Pattern and the First Step Act, then you're able to monitor and gain some accountability. So they see how it works each year, and there's a report that's done. And so you can see how this impacts at the implementation level. And then, of course, at the micro level, when we think about again, public administrator morale, we want to be able to say that we're part of an industry or a part of a movement that gives people equal protection under the law. And so when we consider algorithms, you're sort of taking the human element out of some of these service providers. And so that, of course, impacts legitimacy when you're taking that discretion out of it and you're using numbers and systems to decide people's future, et cetera. So there has to be a balance between when these algorithms are used and when they're good for strategizing and adaptability, and of course, when there is that need for the human element to kick in, and when there is maybe algorithms only need to be supportive for certain decisions and not an overarching decision that people use. And so, yeah, I'll wait for questions at the end. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You have plenty of time. I was just about to throw up 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Something popped up and I thought you had flashed a sign or something. Something started flashing. I don't know what that was, so I thought I had.
No, you still have 2.5 minutes if you need it.
No, it's okay.
She said, I'm done. I'm fine. All right, well, thank you for that. Learned so much. Dr. Williams, would you like to share your PowerPoint, or would you like me to share the PDF that you sent?
Let me check to see if this pulls up and everybody can see it.
Yes.
Everybody see? Okay. I can go from here.
All right.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Williams, Dr. Eric Williams, adjunct instructor and administrative coordinator at South Carolina State University. And this morning, I will be presenting on performance indicators, intended and unintended consequences for HBCUs. So this is a presentation that is pulling from my dissertation that I just completed last year. looking at HBCUs and how they are affected by specific policies that are implemented by way of accrediting agencies, and looking at how those accrediting agencies make decisions based on issues that may be going on their particular campuses through those accrediting agencies. So by looking at this, I'm looking at the gap in the research literature, just showing how this study has explored higher education in general, but more specifically HBCUs over the last 10 years that are affected by accrediting performance indicators. And it's often has been indicated in the research that the indicators are either incorrect or they're outdated. And what's happening is a lot of these institutions are falling victim to systemic defunding, either by their respective state or by the federal government through appropriations, by way of them using those indicators by the accrediting institutions. So the research design that I used for this study was a quantitative non-experimental design. Employed my independent variable, which was retention rates, a mediating variable, which was enrollment, dependent variables, state appropriations, and then I had 3 explanatory variables, performance model, governance, and state capacity. So the theoretical conceptual framework behind this research was resource dependence theory. I chose resource dependence theory because I wanted to kind of look at this theory at its fundamental core. It's been used in a lot of management disciplines, but in researching it and seeing exactly what resource dependence theory was discussing, researchers have logged it as, if you have an environment that is affected by another environment, that first environment has to change, augment, and fit a mold of that much larger environment. So essentially they are changing something about themselves, and they're essentially becoming like either a ghost of themselves or a former, they're becoming different. And seeing how resource dependence also ties back into public higher education, you see that there's an environmental impact to this, whether it be state, local, state, and federal, the organizational effectiveness of the institution, environmental constraints, and then the issues that surround obtaining the resources for that particular institution. I also had an opportunity to speak with 2 colleagues, Dr. Bennett and Dr. Law. As I was closing in on finalizing my research, I ran up on an article that they had published, and in speaking with them, asked if I would be able to use a figure that they had created for their article with slight augmentation to kind of tie it back into my research. Their original position was that, of course, if you're looking at resource dependence as like the middle tilt, whether you're heavier financially with state appropriations or heavier with tuition revenue being generated by the students attending, their position was if there's a weak state appropriations, then in fact there would be a weak tuition revenue. So it was kind of flipped. On the left, it was strong, weak, and on the right was weak, strong. I asked them if I could augment this because for my research, I looked at it as a balance beam of if we have a weak state appropriations and that moves tuition revenue up, then that means that you have a stronger the influence on financial stability is on tuition versus state appropriations. But then vice versa, if it's a stronger state appropriations, then you have more finances from the state or from outside sources that are not coming in directly to the school, which then requires you not to have to focus so much of your energy into tuition revenue, which would require it to be weaker. With that, I looked at that as sort of, with state appropriations is policy driven, with tuition revenue is demographic driven based on enrolled students at the institution at that time for FTEs. That led to the research question and hypothesis of, for my study, do academic accrediting agencies such as the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, SACS, performance indicators affect state funding allocations for HBCUs? With no hypothesis of there is no relationship between performance indicators and funding decisions, and then the research or alternative hypothesis of there is a relationship between performance indicators and funding decisions. So the data sources and the start of the data collection plan for this was collecting data from the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Database System. Most of us know as IPEDS. This study was based on secondary data collection. The starting years was 2010 to 2019 for 4-year public land grant institutions. Later on in the study, I had to augment this due to a lack of having enough data for the latter year for IPEDS, being that it ran at the time of collection. IPEDS kind of runs a year behind, so I didn't have enough data at that particular time. So I had to augment my data collection capture to 2009 to 2018. And I utilized a purposive sampling process that utilized an exclusion strategy as well. With that, the exclusion strategy simply allowed for me to narrow my search down and pull out a sample, but the full scope of everything was looking and targeting historically Black colleges and universities with a student population ranging from 1 to 15,000 students, having a complete data set with full data for 10 academic years, 2009 to 2018, limited to 4-year academic programs, institutions located in the SACS region, a public land grant institution, and being fully accredited by SACS with no pending infractions. So with this allowed me to pull 11 schools within the Southeastern region for my performance-based schools, going back to Florida, Florida A&M, Kentucky, Kentucky State, Louisiana, Southern University and A&M College, Mississippi, Alcorn State University, Tennessee, Tennessee State, Virginia, Virginia State University, and the non-performance-based state budget states with schools, Alabama, Alabama A&M, Georgia, Fort Valley State, North Carolina, North Carolina A&T, South Carolina, South Carolina State, and Texas, Prairie. There was a very interesting thing that I was able to pull from this part of the data collection. Even though I had 11 schools and 6 of them are listed here as performance-based states, or at least for schools, 2 of the states are actually performance-based states, which is North Carolina and Texas. However, the differentiation is that they only assess schools at the technical schools and schools at the 2-year level instead of schools at the 4-year level, which pulled them out of the performance-based category and placed them in the non-performance-based category based on the sample collection process. With this, we came up with a model that we want to perform a bivariate analysis. This was utilizing a correlational design, which of course testing for association, utilizing scatter plots and seeing if there was in fact a monotonic relationship in the data. And then later on, utilizing a multiple regression or two sets of regressions that ended with a multiple regression, seeing exactly what was the significance, seeing if these indicators and the independent and dependent variables were in fact statistically significant or not statistically significant. So in performing the scatter plots on performance-based states, as you can see here, we had the 6 schools. 5 of the 6 showed that there was in fact a positive monotonic relationship between state appropriations and retention rates. The outlier for the performance-based states was Tennessee State. And for the non-performance states, 3 of the 5 showed a positive, actually showed a negative monotonic relationship, while 2 of them showed a positive, which was South Carolina State and Prairie View A&M. With this, I was able to conduct a multiple regression that kind of showed the relationship. As you can see, retention and state capacity for all institutions by assessing all institutions based on just retention and looking at performance models, state capacity, and governance. 2 of those categories showed to be significant. Same thing, but having to go out and extract out enrollment, we ended up with enrollment being a significant indicator and higher education structure being a significant indicator for that test. Within this model, I extracted the performance-based states, and then the non-performance-based states. So with this, I still had to run both of the tests using retention and enrollment. Based on retention, all came back statistically significant. With enrollment, all came back statistically significant as well. On the non-performance-based side, for retention, only retention came back as statistically significant. For enrollment and state capacity was statistically significant. So with this, the intended and unintended consequences and some implications and social change impacts that we will see here is that accrediting agencies need to be held more accountable for the outdated indicators, just with a little bit more focus on the real outcomes, which is essentially adequate tracking of alumni, job placement, and things of that nature. And looking at the system holistically, because they haven't really been assessed I'm looking at 10 years, but it's actually been more than like 25. We're actually pushing closer to 30 years now, which leads to additional research needing to demonstrate those indicators, a little bit more real data that shows how the indicators positively or negatively impact institutions, and looking at seeing how you can understand the alternative lens that public higher education fits in within the theory. Also looking at other indicators, such as like when I looked at retention instead of graduation rates, just looking at a specific or less common indicator, and then additional research on the difference between performance-based and non-performance-based budget institutions. Seeing how policies and legislations actually make a difference for those states that implement their higher education budgets using these methods in some capacity. And I will also add, because it came back to me, which will be my final point, that also looking at where my study stopped and essentially where we are now, 5 years out, we can actually kind of reassess this study as looking at to see how we can find a fresh perspective to see if in fact we are still seeing these issues happening with these states, and if not, with other comparable HBCUs following that same outline, or seeing exactly what's going on within those states. And with that, I am finished.
Thank you for that. I have tons of questions. Let's see, we will move to our last presentation. Would you all like me to share the PowerPoint? Okay. Okay, and we will have Dr. Roberts Lewis and Dr. Bailey presenting on behalf of the team. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. You all can take it away. And I'm here to help as well.
All right, I'll get started. Let's see if I have controls to, I don't think I have, I think we're ready for the next. You have the controls to move the
Yes.
slides, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Just tell me when you want me to advance. I saw you
Okay.
looking. I said, okay.
Dr. Roberts Lewis, were you going to start us off or was I going to
No,
start?
I was going to conclude.
Okay. All right, so let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Moving to the next slide. Good morning. Today, we're going to just briefly talk about the purpose of our study, our questions, our design. We're going to talk a little bit about the findings and themes, discussions, and implications and conclusions. Moving on to the next slide. We're looking at NASPA accredited Masters in Public Administration programs at HBCUs to better understand the origins and perceptions of mentorship. The perceptions of mentorship have to do with the origins, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Our framework is that a student's success depends upon faculty success, and investing in faculty is really important at this point. We seek to determine the role of mentorship specifically in terms of women of color. All three of us are women of color, faculty members at HBCU, and to look at questions to better understand what expectations are. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you. Question one, what mentoring researches are provided to students and junior faculty? How is mentorship measured for tenure and promotion? And what are the expectations and who's likely to participate in mentorship responsibilities at our institutions? Moving to the next slide, thank you. This is a qualitative research design, collaborative autoethnography, which means that we interviewed, we responded to a set of questions, and based on that set of questions, the findings that you will see shortly came from those set of questions. And ethnography is as many people know in terms of qualitative research, allows those who participate in the experience to speak on behalf of that experience. Thank you. Moving to the next slide. The origins of mentoring in Black colleges start with the origins of our institutions themselves. And as most people in this presentation know, Black colleges were founded in resistance to slave codes, and slave codes that were implemented throughout the South, beginning in the early 1800s, no, 1700s, and remained throughout the South, actually long after slavery. And the first Black college, as many people in this dialogue know, is now Cheyney State University, which was founded in Pennsylvania in 1837. And what happened with slave codes, not only was learning illegal, Black learning illegal, but the movement of Blacks throughout the South, and what we know now is often in northern states, was restricted. So slave codes impacted not only those southern states that were slave states, but they also impacted northern states, in that if you were found assisting an enslaved person or a Black person, you could be arrested and brought to the state where you were doing the assistance to be tried. So in resistance to that, Cheney and many other institutions started for free Blacks first, but then also for newly freed Blacks, starting in 1865 with Shaw University in the South and Bowie State University in the North, which was one of the first institutions founded for freed Blacks. And what many people don't know is Maryland was a slave state. Okay, so these institutions started with underfunded, not funded, and not resourced. And secondly, the modem in which they were founded was all needs just come. So education was combined, the intellectual pursuit that you came for was combined with all of the other needs that newly freed Blacks had, and that Blacks who were never enslaved also had. So our colleges were founded in a cauldron of just come. All that you need, we will help you with. Our goal and mission is the uplift of the Black race, which certainly meant the intellectual uplift, but it meant everything from the beginning. So the origins of how our colleges were founded in terms of just come. If you are admitted here, we are here for your uplift. So as our colleges began to solidify, that sort of just come became indoctrinated, and the faculty and staff that worked at our colleges, our jobs were whatever our students need. And when they are admitted to just come, and our jobs became out of that origin to build and to uplift the Black race. So out of where we were founded, the unwritten job descriptions became all of the other things that students needed in addition to the intellectual development. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So that mentorship model became encoded. Many researchers began to encode that mentorship model. What you see now is a mentorship model that's encoded at HBCUs by Pascarella and Tinto. And they looked at mostly white institutions, but they also looked at HBCUs. But faculty became central to that mentorship, molding, building, giving students what they needed to develop professionally and to develop in life, and all the other things outside of the coursework became part of a model of what it means to mentor students. But as time went on, all of the other, there was never any in the founding of Black colleges. We all know here, I'm talking to the choir, there was never any training or modeling of what all those other things meant. It was just something our institutions did. And as time went on, it became an expectation. And as the other resource needs of Black students and all students became a part of what colleges and universities did universally, then all the other things that was at first just part of what happened when our colleges was founded became encoded in job descriptions of mentoring our students in addition to teaching our students, when at first that was all one model, and it's heavily embedded in the faculty's responsibilities. Next slide.
All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Bailey.
Thank you.
Yes, and so as she noted, this idea of mentoring, and even in the introduction to what HBCUs were founded to do, and this notion that we are here to provide a holistic experience for students, which in some ways creates the distinction between what a student may receive at an HBCU as opposed to a PWI. And so one of the challenges with this idea of mentoring is definitions in terms of what that looks like. What are the expectations, not simply from an individual perspective, but from an institutional perspective. And so one of our tasks in this exercise was to review, for example, our university's policies and procedures, which were in the faculty handbook, around what are faculty expectations for mentoring. And so for many of us, we struggled to find what that looked like for faculty, although it was very well defined what it meant for students. And so when we think about the mentoring aspect from a student perspective, we know on a continuum, it falls between either a career kind of function, which also includes academic advising, which we'll talk about momentarily, but also a psychological function. And so how do we help students who come to us not just with academic kinds of needs and interests, but how do we help them to be able to navigate the academy, but also the balance of their expectations in school as opposed to things that are affecting them externally from the university. So some of the challenges, again, noted with mentoring was, how is it articulated? How is it defined? And what are the expectations for faculty? We are very clear that we are to mentor students, but how does that mentoring then translate to the role of the faculty member? Mentoring is often overlooked and undervalued. So for faculty members, we operate on what we refer to as a three-legged stool. We're responsible for teaching, for research, and service. And so we struggle to define where mentoring falls within that three-legged stool. Certainly it happens with teaching and can happen with service, but is not particularly explicitly defined in our evaluations, while we spend a lot of time engaged in this endeavor. And for most of us who choose a career in the academy, this is critical to our decision to do so. There are limited resources and it consumes a lot of time. Some of our conversations focused around, even if students are not assigned to us by the department chair or the dean or the coordinator, that once students determine that you are a safe space and this is a person who is going to aid in their growth and development personally and professionally, then the word begins to spread, and all of the students, whether they're assigned to you or not, acclimate to you. And so it becomes time consuming, and it isn't something that you can shut off. So we don't just conclude the mentoring at the end of the semester or at the end of an academic year, or even when students graduate, that once those relationships are developed and solidified, we continue to develop those. Next slide, please. So there are some crises when we think about this mentoring model and this mentoring aspect. As I said before, it is very labor intensive, and it's also very emotional on the part of those of us who engage in this aspect. So when we think about the crisis that exists, there is a lack of mentoring. It contributes to what we refer to as the leaky pipeline in terms of people who are interested in pursuing careers in the academy may deem this to be overextension of their responsibilities or duties, or determining that I am spending what I believe is important and making an important contribution and investment into the lives of students, but I'm not being rewarded for that as it relates to my performance evaluation and the performance metrics. And so it becomes very difficult because it is time consuming and it costs us something to engage in that. And if there's a heavy investment into the mentoring role, it also means that simultaneously there could be a decline in our commitments in the other aspects of that three-legged stool. Secondly, we know that there is the vanishing presence of women in the academy. And we know historically women were slow to integrate into the academy in the profession of the role of a teacher. And on the surface, it appears that women are heavily entrenched in these academic roles, as they comprise a good share of individuals in this space. But if you think about the roles that they serve, when we look at women of color, particularly, only 2% of them, for example, are women who are tenured, who have risen from the rank of assistant to associate professor. And that is a far distinction from their male counterparts. And so because of the kind of life responsibilities and roles of women, you see women serving in inferior roles, sometimes as an instructor, as a teaching assistant, and sometimes as adjunct or part-time faculty. We can never underestimate or understate the pay disparity that exists in society in general, but certainly still exists in pay disparities as it relates to men and women in the academic environment, where women are still earning less than 80 cents to the dollar that men are earning. What we're also experiencing in the academy is the Great Resignation. And so COVID has caused people in general in the academy to reconsider if this is the pathway that they want to continue. And one survey that was conducted by the Chronicle of Higher Ed of around 1,100 faculty members suggested that the pandemic created, and the changing landscape post the pandemic, which caused many of us to work from home. And while it was a great opportunity, it also increased our work responsibilities. More than 55% of the persons who responded to that survey suggested that they needed to rethink their commitment to the academy. And they were thinking about non-academic careers that would create a greater balance for their work and home responsibilities. Next slide. So our findings, from our findings, we identified 3 key themes. The first thing we identified was that we rise by lifting others. So in all of our experiences, whether the faculty member or the researcher had attended an HBCU, one of the things that drove us and consistently committed us to our work, it was intentionality, that we chose to come to HBCUs because of our belief in their mission, our belief in their ability to empower students, our ability to want to help steward the next generation of leaders in the diversity of fields and spheres of influence that look like us. And we believe that from our own experiences that we could be a good conduit to their growth and development. A second thing that that emanated from our work was this notion of the blind leading the blind. And it really speaks to the ambiguity that exists around our expectations for mentoring. As I noted and alluded to earlier, that first and foremost, there's not really definitive kinds of expectations in our performance management systems that speak to what our roles and responsibilities are for mentoring and how that is factored in to our annual performance appraisals, but also in our ability to be promoted and tenured. And so while we know that it is an inherently important aspect of our work and something that is central to HBCUs, we also really struggled with the ambiguity around that and wanted to highlight this in the research so that we can extend and create more conversation and dialogue around that. Lastly is that there's a hole in the bucket. There is a lack of resources, and we really commenced this conversation by suggesting that HBCUs started with this idea of being underfunded and under-resourced, but we also see this specifically in this aspect of mentoring. So one, when we talked about the two kind of spheres of mentoring, that either it is career or academic focus or it is psychological, while many of us may find comfort in the career and academic space, sometimes the psychological expectations of mentoring goes beyond the scope of our expertise. And so how do we consistently get access to resources, both internal and external to the university, to be successful in that endeavor? Next slide. So as we stated, or as I stated before, a part of this is the difficulty in defining mentorship. What does it mean? And it is one of these terms that really requires an intentionality as it relates to definition within the context of your department, your college, and or your university. And so that there is continuity in those expectations, but also in the delivery of the service. Because we want to be very clear in this role, but we also want to be sure that we're operating within the confines of the expectations of the university. So next slide. Thank you. So from our discussion, from our findings, there were several recommendations that we wanted to offer that we believe will help in the path forward to effective mentoring in HBCUs, and also ensuring that we as women of color and those that are going to come behind us have a better understanding of what those expectations, and creating some balances. We wanted to offer these three recommendations. The first is to develop clear language and expectations, and not just in conversation, but also in official documents from the university, and that these things should be embedded in the evaluation and the metric by which we are going to be evaluated as it relates to faculty performance, also as it relates to our viability for promotion and tenure. Which leads to recommendation 2, devising certain kinds of standards that recognize gender differences. Because one thing that is heavily noted is that women are more susceptible to fulfilling this role, from the research, from the literature, and from our experiences, than our male counterparts. And so because women are at the forefront of providing this, how do we create more opportunities and standards related to that? And to ensure that as we are defining this, that we understand how it extends beyond the role of academic advisement, and that we find practical ways to quantify what kind of activities would be counted within these expectations and standards. And then third and final was training. Training and professional development related to advising and mentoring, how to build rapport with students, how to ensure that we create safe spaces that are non-judgmental, that helps us to suspend biases and other issues that may relate to cultural sensitivity, sexual orientation, and all kinds of other issues related to diversity, so that we can be successful in this endeavor, were some of our key recommendations. Next slide. So finally, as it relates to our conclusion and implications, in this study, we determined how faculty perceive their role as mentors is strongly influenced by our past experiences being mentored. And so for me and others, we thought about ways in which we were developed along our academic trajectory, being able to have a conversation with a mentor that we chose or was assigned to us as our academic advisor, being able to discuss our research interests or our career pathway. All of these things are critically important. But also understanding that recommendation that we want more information to be as successful as we can in this endeavor. Secondly, mentoring is more than quantitative accounts of time allocation, but rather it's embedded within a broader holistic approach to the graduate experience. And really, we also believe it is embedded within the HBCU culture. But we see a lot of the focus and responsibility for mentoring being placed on junior faculty who have an undue burden of also increasing their teaching performance outcomes and ensuring that they are engaged in research and doing service both internal and external to the university in preparation for the tenure and promotion process. HBCUs, thirdly, should be on the front lines in examining this because this is inherent to our mission. This is inherent to why we were created, and we want to be sure that we are doing it in the way that is appropriate for the new student population. And failure to do so or to take these things into consideration could lead to further this notion of the Great Resignation, specifically as it relates to women in the academy. So we'll stop there for questions and answers. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody for their presentations. We did go a bit over. I wanted to open it up to the floor to see if we have any questions for any of our panelists. All right, I can open it up. Looking back at Tia's project, your project really speaks to the importance of mentors that are culturally responsive and making sure you have those initiatives. And it made me think while you were talking about this idea, if you see it, you can achieve it. And I wanted to know if you are noticing any changes in the figures of Indian tribal individuals who are pursuing academia or in higher rates post-COVID, since there have been those shifts in the accessibility of education.
Okay, so you were asking far as the students, if the difference in...
I think you were looking before COVID, correct?
Yes, it was pre-COVID. And so the numbers did change a lot. I mean, of course, everybody was impacted by COVID. We were restricted and just, I don't have the numbers, but I did see a lot of students did stay back. They didn't attend. The number was pretty low around that year. Even the year after, there were a lot of families. Again, our families are multi-generated, families that live in the same household. And so they had grandparents that they had to think of and they couldn't get out. Even though a lot of institutions had virtual accessibility, just a lot of students, it's just hard virtually. I mean, because we as Native people have to be in the presence of others and in order to learn, right? And so that it changed, it shifted. I mean, until this day, I will tell my professors, look, can I come to the classrooms? I learn better when I'm there. And so we saw a lot of students having difficulties coming back from COVID.
Okay, see, I would think that it would be a little bit opposite, since it seemed like the landscape of academia changed where it would seem more accessible to students, but I wasn't thinking about the social connection aspect that comes along with some students have to be in person. They need that. So even if it has the flexibility of being online, it still creates a challenge.
Yes, ma'am. And remember the story that I had brought up of the Native student that had transferred from a university into a community college. He was, again, from a family and community oriented, and it was just, he had a struggle. And until this day, like, that's one of the biggest things he cannot, I mean, he does his best. I just think that's just one of the things that we just have to continue to learn in this new world, in this new norm. And so, yeah.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a question for Tia. I was just wondering, I know that you said you're a master's student, but are you framing this project in terms of like a quantitative or qualitative approach? Because I'm hearing you talk about student experiences, but then at the same time, I'm also hearing like lots of this rich conversation about numbers and these different issues of causality. So have you thought about like moving forward if you can frame this in terms of a quantitative or qualitative project?
With y'all's presentation, honestly, I am really thinking about doing this and moving forward into doing more of a broad research and doing quantitative and qualitative researches. And even even with the last presentation, I thought that was great. I mean, you have shown and made me realize, man, that is something that as in the Native American communities, that's something that we lack as well in mentoring in the post-secondary education. So.
I think there was a comment in the chat that also sparked something about the differences in universities. So once graduation happens, are you seeing more individuals or individuals representing the different tribes? One, if there's a difference between the tribes that are located in Mississippi, and two, seeing if there's a difference between if they're choosing to go to community colleges and then to four-year universities, or is it the opting out of higher education altogether?
Well, for Mississippi, we're the only fairly recognized and the only tribe in the state of Mississippi. And so, but we do compare, well, I have to put that on my research, but I have like Cherokee Nation in North Carolina. They are all about the higher education, and they have their tribes. And just like ours, though, if they got their degree, they do come back to our tribe and work for the tribe. And so I see that in every tribal nations and tribes that when they have their members going into post-secondary and got their degree, they all come back and work for the tribe. I mean, even though they can go further, they just, that's something that we just still want to make an impact in our tribal communities.
Okay. I think we have room for one more, and this is for Dr. Williams. I see a lot of overlap between our paper on mentorship and your paper on performance indicators. And it made me think while you were talking, resource dependence kind of seems to be the higher education way of teaching to the test, and specifically looking at enrollment and retention. So I was glad to see that you are suggesting other performance measures, because I know there was a lot of discussion when we were doing our paper about the quality of students in the classrooms. And if we just focus on enrollments and making sure we have tuition, which HBCUs have a tendency to are driven by tuition, we look at the quality and what happens to students after the fact. So I just wanted to know what your next steps are with this project.
Very quickly, so what I'm actually looking to do, I want to broaden the scope and actually look at not just the public HBCUs. I actually want to see what's the differentiation between the private institutions, and then even from there, see what's the differentiation as far as looking at comparable institutions that are PWIs and seeing what is the differentiation in, policies and funding allotments at those levels. So, yes, ma'am.
Okay. The other thing I have in the little 10 seconds that we have made me think about artificial intelligence, and just thinking about Maria's conversation was like, are we putting too much faith in artificial intelligence?
Yes. And then he left there and went to work with waste management as the vice president.
Yes, and I invited him when I was president of Mississippi chapter of ASPA to come, and he came. And he did that. I wanted him to do the same speech that he did at COMPA, and he did. And I still have a copy of that speech.
He sent
So
me.
that will be, I will. And
Okay.
that will be part of the history as well.
Mhm.
But history is so important. Sometimes, as we get older, we want to pass down these things. We think that things should continue to change and evolve, but don't forget about your history.
Exactly.
We can still discuss. Christy, do you have any questions? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm muted. Oh, she didn't come back. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was really fascinated by Tia's work, and
Yeah, because I was thinking that too. I'm not too familiar with the tribe in Mississippi, but I know the tribe that is in North Carolina, there are school-specific initiatives to support specific needs. And so it's targeted for that tribe to make sure that they are attending school. So it was interesting to see the difference in Mississippi.
yes.
And I wanted to see if there were support systems in place in secondary school, which will encourage students to go to higher ed institutions.
So it's my understanding, if I remember correctly, there are many reservations in the state, but like you, when we were doing our work with the welfare reform, I was engaged and learned a lot about their processes. But yeah, I was fascinated by her presentation and her work and engagement with students, and also that the students felt compelled to return to the reservation to work, after they completed post-secondary, although they were encouraging them to go and to pursue other kinds of opportunities. So I wanted to talk to her about, my questions was, in what ways do they engage with people who are from that community who work outside of the reservation to create some or facilitate some mentoring or partnerships with those individuals to steward the next generation? But
that's why I said that if you see it, you can achieve it. So I think a lot of people, if you don't see yourself in those positions, and it made me think about cultural and tribal concordance with mentoring. That you have somebody who's considered an outsourced mentoring, and they don't really understand the dynamics within the culture. That's not as encouraging as if you had somebody who's familiar with some of the customs.
Absolutely.
Advocating for you to go to school.
And it's interesting too, because you think about other kinds of groups where you see the younger population saying, we want to leave, we want to create our own pathway, and not that we are disrespecting the history and the culture, but we want to chart our own path. So that could also be something that you utilize in other cultural kind of contexts, that they are able to embed something within their development and within these cultural ethos that are causing people to want to remain there.
Yes, Pembroke. I could not think of it, Dr. Bailey. I was like, in North Carolina, I could see it, but I could not think of the school. But they have tons of initiatives.
Wow.
At UNC Pembroke.
Yes, Dr. Cole, I work for UNCF now. I do not work at Southern University anymore.
Oh, they're sending private.
A message, yeah.
Dr. Williams, you said you were going to look at HBCUs and PWIs, or the differences between state-funded and privately funded HBCUs?
Both, actually. Not at this, not concurrently at the same time, but looking to see what's the differentiation in the public and the private HBCUs, and then coming back to my original study and finding the comparable PWI that would match the model, whether it's, looking at what would be considered the flagship HBCU of the state, looking at the flagship PWI of the state,
Mhm.
seeing what are the actual differences in their funding
Okay.
levels. You know, we know that it's astronomical, but really understanding the down to the core of what's going on. And you all tied something back to me that I also forgot to mention in my study, which was that my study is also mission driven. So it's actually tying back into understanding that HBCUs that are plagued by funding disparities find themselves having to change something about themselves, and it's compromising their mission, which is to be the institution that, you know, educate, matriculates, and graduates students from an underserved population. And, you know, it ties back to the very existence of our institutions, which kind of brought me back to that, because that's the background of how I got to my actual my research. So
Question, what is the I say accredited body on here, but if we have SAC CLC, what is it in the north for the northern HBCUs? Is it still SAC CLC?
In the north, no. In the north, I thought it was a different one.
I think it's different. And
yeah, because the S is for Southern. Yes.
Yeah, so I would be interested to see if there's a difference between HBCUs located in the South and HBCUs located in the North, in addition to private and public HBCUs.
yes.
Because I think there would be some kind of difference. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Bailey.